She lay in a hospital bed, heartbroken, holding on to life, and the truth shattered everything. The man she loved was living a double life, planning a future with someone else while she suffered alone. But instead of breaking, she transformed. Pain became clarity. Betrayal became fuel. This is not just a story about loss, it's about rising when you have nothing left. The lesson? Your lowest moment can be your turning point. Like and share for more stories. Thanks for watching.
At 8 months pregnant, Rachel lay bleeding on her cold kitchen floor. Her world was supposed to be perfect. Her husband, Marcus, was meant to be in London, closing a billion-dollar deal. He had promised to call her every night, but her brother checked Marcus's location. He was not on another continent. He was just 20 minutes away inside another woman's apartment, while his wife fought for her life. The secrets Rachel would soon uncover would tear her perfect world apart. They would challenge every single thing she believed about her marriage and the man she adored. But Marcus made a very big mistake. He believed Rachel was weak. He thought she would simply accept the broken pieces of the life he left her and quietly disappear. He could not have been more wrong. The woman who survived that awful night was not the same person who collapsed. She returned stronger, sharper, and filled with a deep desire to ruin the man who had betrayed her. This is the amazing story of how a pregnant wife went from being a victim to a victor, and I can assure you the turns in her story will leave you completely stunned. But before we get into it, you should know this is more than just a tale of drama. This is a story about survival. Over the next hour and a half, you are going to see how to recognize the warning signs of a manipulator before they can control your life. You will witness how the wealthy and powerful can ignore the rules to silence those they hurt. Most of all, you will understand that no matter how hopeless things seem, you always have the strength to fight back. Every betrayal Rachel faces, every trap that is set for her, and every time she is denied justice, there is a lesson that might one day help you or someone you love. So listen carefully. The knowledge in this story is worth more than any amount of money. The call to 911 came in at 11:47 on a Saturday night. A terrified voice, shaky and weak, came over the line. "My sister is 8 months pregnant, and there is blood everywhere. Please, you have to help her." The dispatcher's voice was professional and calm. "Ma'am, I need you to stay on the phone with me. What is your address?" 427 Whitmore Drive in Greenwich, Connecticut. "It is the Bennett estate. Please, hurry. She is not moving." "Can you check if she is breathing?" There was a brief silence, filled only by the sound of someone desperately listening for a sign of life. "Yes, but it is very shallow. Oh my gosh, there is so much blood." "Help is on the way, ma'am. Please stay on the line with her." The call ended, but the pure fear in that voice would stay with everyone who heard it. The woman on the marble floor of her stunning home was about to discover a horrifying truth. The life she thought she had was a carefully crafted lie. And her husband, the man who promised to love and protect her, was not closing a business deal in London. He was only a 20-minute drive away, wrapped in the arms of another woman. Just 12 hours earlier, Rachel Bennett's life had seemed absolutely perfect. At 32 years old, she had everything. She lived in a beautiful mansion that had been in a design magazine. Her husband was worth over $2 billion, and she was just 4 weeks away from meeting her baby girl. The nursery was already finished. The walls were a gentle pink, and tiny outfits were folded perfectly in the dressers. Those dressers cost more than the old car Rachel once loved, but Marcus had made her sell it. He said she needed a much safer car for their child, so a brand new Tesla was parked in the garage and her 10-year-old Honda was given away before she even had a chance to say goodbye. "It is just a car, Rachel," he told her when she got upset. "I'm just trying to protect our family." That was how Marcus operated. He was always the protector, always the provider, and always the one who knew what was best for her. Rachel was in her large living room arranging white roses and vases for her baby shower. Soon, 30 of her friends and relatives would be there to celebrate baby Emma. But most of them were the wives of Marcus's business partners. Rachel's own friends had slowly drifted away over her 3 years of marriage. Only Diane was left, and even she said that Rachel was never available anymore. The first cramp hit her as she was setting up the gift table. She let out a little gasp and put a hand on her round stomach. She smiled, thinking it was just a practice contraction. Her doctor said they were common for new mothers. But 5 minutes later, another one came, and this one was much more intense. Rachel set down the vase and took a deep breath. She tried to convince herself she was just exhausted. She had been on her feet all morning, trying to make every detail of the party perfect. Marcus had wanted to hire a team of professionals, but she said no. Planning this shower was one of the only things left in her life that felt like it was truly hers. She pulled out her phone to text him. She just wanted to feel connected to him, even with an ocean separating them. "Hi, honey. The house looks amazing for the shower. I miss you. Call me when you have a moment." She watched her phone, hoping to see the little dots that meant he was typing a reply. But no dots appeared. The official story was that Marcus was in London for a major deal with his company, Bennett Technologies. He had been gone for 3 days and had promised to call every night. But for the last 48 hours, every call went directly to his voicemail. "The talks are at a very critical stage," his assistant Jennifer had explained. "He asked for no interruptions unless it is a true emergency." The third contraction was so strong that it forced Rachel to her knees. This was not a false alarm. The pain felt like a fire spreading through her, making it impossible to breathe or think clearly. She grabbed onto the gift table to steady herself, and that is when she saw it. A dark red pool was spreading across the white marble floor. There was far too much blood. Rachel tried to call for help, but the catering team was in the kitchen. Too far away to hear her, her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, her vision starting to blur. She called Marcus one more time. Voicemail. She called Jennifer. No one answered. With the last ounce of her strength, she dialed the one person in the world who she knew would always answer. "Tyler," she whispered when her brother picked up. "Something is wrong. The baby. There is so much blood." "Rach? Rachel, where are you?" "I am at home, Tyler. I think I am dying." The phone fell from her hand as another wave of agony crashed over her. She could hear her brother's voice, small and distant, shouting her name before the world went black. Tyler Morrison broke every speed limit on the drive from Queens to Greenwich. He was a construction foreman, not a wealthy executive. He drove an old pickup truck that was dotted with rust. The police in Greenwich should have stopped him for going 90 miles per hour in a 55 zone. But they must have seen the pure terror on his face and decided to let him go. Tyler had never trusted Marcus Bennett. From the day his sister introduced him to the tech billionaire, something felt off. The man was too charming, too polished, and too perfect. But Rachel had been so deeply in love, completely convinced she had found her fairy tale. She truly believed she was getting her happily ever after. So Tyler kept his opinions to himself. That is what a good brother is supposed to do. You stand by your sister even when you have a bad feeling about her choices. He used the emergency key Rachel had given him years before. It was from a time when she had a small apartment in Brooklyn, long before Marcus moved her into his enormous glass mansion in Connecticut. The moment he opened the front door, Tyler's heart stopped. Rachel was collapsed on the floor in the middle of a growing circle of dark blood. Her face was as white as a sheet, and her breathing was so shallow he could barely see her chest move. "Rach!" Tyler fell to his knees beside her. His hands trembled above her body, afraid to touch her. He had no idea how to stop the bleeding. He only knew that his little sister was fading away right in front of him. The paramedics showed up 7 minutes later, but it felt like an eternity. They worked with quiet focus, placing Rachel on a stretcher and calling out medical terms that Tyler did not understand. One of them asked for Rachel's medical information. Another asked if she was allergic to anything. A third paramedic asked where her husband was. That question felt like a physical blow to Tyler. Where was Marcus? As the ambulance raced to Greenwich Hospital, Tyler tried calling Marcus's phone one more time. It went straight to voicemail. He tried his assistant, Jennifer. Voicemail again. He even called the main office for Bennett Technologies. But a recorded message said the offices were closed for the weekend. His sister was in the back of an ambulance, possibly dying, and her billionaire husband was completely unreachable. Something was very, very wrong. Dr. Patricia Williams had been a surgeon for 23 years. She knew how to share devastating news with compassion while still being direct. She found Tyler in the hospital waiting area. He was still wearing his work clothes, which were now covered in dust and his sister's blood. "Mr. Morrison?" she said, sitting down next to him. "I am Dr. Williams. I have been caring for your sister." Tyler jumped up from his chair. "Is she okay? What about the baby?" Dr. Williams gently guided him to sit back down. Her expression was kind, but her eyes were filled with a heavy seriousness. "My sister was in the middle of a serious medical emergency. The doctor said her placenta had torn away from the wall of her uterus far too early. It was causing massive internal bleeding. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under Tyler's feet." He asked, "What does that mean for them?" The doctor replied, "It means we need to perform an emergency C-section this instant. The baby is in distress and Rachel is losing blood faster than we can replace it." Dr. Williams paused, making sure Tyler understood just how serious this was. "I have to be honest with you. The situation is extremely dangerous for both of them," Tyler pleaded. "But you can save them, right? You can save both of them? We are doing everything humanly possible, but I need you to sign these consent forms. You are listed as Rachel's emergency contact." Tyler just stared at her, confused. "I am her emergency contact. What about her husband?" A flicker of disapproval crossed the doctor's face. "According to our records, you are the primary contact. We have tried to reach Mr. Bennett, but we have not been able to get a hold of him." With a hand that would not stop shaking, Tyler signed the papers. Just then, they wheeled Rachel through the double doors of the operating room. He fell into a hard plastic chair and stared blankly at his phone. He tried calling Marcus again. The call went straight to his voicemail. A sick feeling grew in the pit of Tyler's stomach. Marcus Bennett was many things, and most of them were not good. But he was never, ever hard to reach. His entire business was built on being available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for his investors. The idea that he would be completely unreachable during a real family crisis seemed impossible. Unless, of course, he was not where he claimed to be. Tyler opened the location-sharing app Rachel had insisted they all use years ago. She started it when their mom was still alive and always worried about them. Rachel's little icon showed she was right here in the hospital. That made sense. Tyler's icon was in the same spot. But Marcus's icon showed he was in Stamford, Connecticut. He was not in London. He was not on a flight over the Atlantic Ocean. He was in Stamford, only 20 minutes away from the hospital. Tyler stared at the phone's screen for what felt like an eternity. His exhausted brain could not process what he was seeing. It had to be a mistake. Maybe Marcus flew into a private airport. Maybe his phone was just connecting to the wrong tower. There had to be a perfectly logical reason for this. But before he worked in construction, Tyler was a soldier. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, his instincts were screaming that Marcus Bennett was exactly where the app said he was. He was doing something he should not be doing while his wife was fighting for her life. Tyler took a screenshot of the location and saved the image. Then, he settled in for a very long wait. The surgery lasted for 5 terrible hours. Tyler paced the waiting room floor until he was dizzy. He drank awful coffee from a machine that tasted like burnt plastic. He ignored calls from concerned relatives who knew the baby shower had been called off. Finally, at 17 minutes after 2 in the morning, Dr. Williams appeared. Her scrubs were stained, but her face was bright with a tired smile. "She made it," the doctor said. "It was a very close call for a while, but your sister is a true fighter." Tyler felt hot tears stream down his face before he even realized he was crying. "What about the baby?" he asked. "Your niece is very small, but she is strong. She weighs 4 pounds and 2 ounces. She will need to stay in the neonatal intensive care unit for a few weeks. But her vital signs are strong. She is a fighter, just like her mother." "Can I see them?" Tyler asked. "Rachel is still recovering from the anesthesia, but you can see the baby." Tyler followed Dr. Williams down a long series of hallways to the NICU. He looked through a large glass window at rows of incubators. Each one held a tiny baby connected to wires and tubes. Dr. Williams pointed to one of the incubators. "That is Emma," she said. Tyler pressed his hand against the cool glass. The baby was so incredibly tiny. Her skin was so thin it looked transparent. Her little chest rose and fell with each small breath. She had a full head of dark hair, just like Rachel. "Your mom is going to be okay, little one. Tyler whispered. And I promise I will get your dad here, even if I have to drag him here myself. But his first task was to find out exactly where Marcus Bennett was hiding. Diane Torres arrived at the hospital at 3 in the morning. She was wearing a long coat over her pajamas. Tyler, what in the world happened? She asked, her eyes wide with worry as she hurried toward him. I saw Rachel's text saying the shower was canceled, and then I could not reach her. I have been calling for hours. She collapsed, Tyler told her. It was a placental abruption. They had to perform an emergency C-section. Oh my goodness, Diane said, sinking into a chair next to him. Is she okay? Is the baby okay? They are both going to make it, but Diane, I have to show you something. Tyler pulled out his phone and showed her the screenshot of Marcus's location. Diane stared at it for a long, quiet moment. That is definitely not London, she said quietly. No, it is not, Tyler confirmed. Where is that? Stamford. It looks like some kind of apartment building, right off of exit 5. Diane's expression turned from worried to furious. That son of a gun. I do not want to jump to conclusions, Tyler said, even though he already had. Maybe there is a good reason. Tyler? Diane said, cutting him off. There is only one reason a married man would be in a random apartment in Stamford instead of in London on business while his wife is nearly dying. We both know what that reason is. Tyler knew she was right. He had known it the instant he saw the little dot on the map. But he needed proof. Rachel deserved to have undeniable proof. I know a guy, Diane said after a moment. He is a private investigator. He is expensive, but he is the absolute best. He is the one who found all of my ex-husband's secret offshore accounts during our divorce. How much does he charge? Tyler asked. Probably more than a construction worker from Queens can afford. But then Diane took out her own phone. It is a good thing for you that I am a paralegal who really hates cheating husbands. I know how to make a deal. Marcus Bennett walked into Greenwich Hospital at 9:15 the next morning. He looked every bit the part of the concerned billionaire husband. He was holding a huge bouquet of expensive white roses and wore a perfectly rehearsed look of worry. His suit was immaculate, his hair was styled perfectly, and his shoes probably cost more than Tyler's monthly rent. Rachel, my darling, Marcus said, gliding into her hospital room as if he were the owner. Tyler then remembered that the Bennett family name was on the hospital's new children's wing, so he probably did own a part of it. I came back as quickly as I could. Rachel was awake by this time. She was pale and very weak, but she was alert. She had been asking for Marcus since the moment she woke up, sure that he was sick with worry. Tyler watched his sister's face light up when she saw her husband, and he felt his own heart break. Marcus, Rachel whispered, you are here. Of course I am here, Marcus said, kissing her forehead. He gently rested his hand on her cheek. I caught the very first flight back from London. Jennifer called and told me what happened the moment I landed. The satellite phone was not working during my meetings. I had no idea anything was wrong. The lie was delivered so perfectly, so smoothly, that it was completely convincing. If Tyler had not seen the location data with his own eyes, he might have believed it himself. Have you seen Emma yet? Rachel asked. Not yet. I had to see you first. How are you feeling? Tyler quietly slipped out of the room. He could not stand to watch Marcus play the role of the devoted husband for another second. Out in the hall, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Diane. My guy can meet with us tomorrow. He said he can find out exactly where Marcus was and who he was with. But Tyler, are you sure you want to go through with this? Once Rachel knows the truth, there is no going back. Tyler looked through the window at his sister. She was giving a weak smile to the man who had abandoned her when she almost died. He typed his reply with steady fingers. Do it. She deserves to know the truth. Carl Mendez did not look like a private investigator. He wore faded blue jeans and a New York Yankees sweatshirt, and he was drinking a cheap coffee from a nearby shop. He looked just like any other guy you would see on the street. He sat in a Manhattan diner trying to look casual, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, constantly moving and taking in every detail. This was a man who had made a career out of watching people. All right, Carl said, sliding into the booth across from Tyler and Diane. Let me get this straight. You think your brother-in-law is cheating on your sister while she is in the hospital with their premature baby? Tyler simply nodded, looking down at the table. I know how it must sound. Carl just shrugged. It sounds like nearly every case I have handled for the past 30 years, he said. A wealthy man cheating on his wife is not exactly a new plot. The only question that matters is how careful he is being. The night she almost died, he was at an apartment in Stamford, Diane added. We saw his location on his phone. Carl's eyebrows shot up. You have location data? Like a screenshot from a sharing app? Tyler nodded again. That is a very good place to begin. Carl pulled out a small, well-used notebook. Tell me everything. I need his name, his business, his daily routine, and anyone you suspect might be involved. For the next hour, Tyler and Diane laid out everything they knew about Marcus Bennett and his company, Bennett Technologies. It all started with his work schedule becoming more and more demanding, filled with business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. Then, about 18 months ago, he hired a young woman named Victoria Chase to be his head of strategic development. Diane explained that she is 27 years old, looks like a supermodel, and Marcus talks about her like she invented the internet. Carl wrote her name down in his notebook. He then looked up and asked, "And how does your sister feel about this Victoria?" Tyler took a moment, trying to recall the few times Rachel had mentioned her. She said that Marcus thinks Victoria is a genius, Tyler answered. He claims she has a kind of vision that most people just can't see. Carl let out a short, cynical laugh. Oh, I am sure she has a vision. A vision that is probably 6 feet tall, with legs for days. He closed his notebook with a snap. Give me 1 week. I will find out exactly what your precious Marcus has been up to. Just 3 days later, Carl called with his first major update. Your brother-in-law has not been to London in 6 months, Carl said without any preamble. His private jet, with the tail number November 787 Romeo Mike, was scheduled to fly to Heathrow last week, but that flight plan was changed, not just once, but twice. So where did he really go? Tyler asked. First, he flew to Los Angeles, and from there to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. He landed in Mexico on the exact same night your sister collapsed, Carl added. Tyler could feel his own anger starting to boil. Mexico, he repeated under his breath. Carl kept going. And the story gets even juicier. Immigration records list 2 passengers on that flight, Marcus Bennett and Victoria Chase. They checked into a resort called Casa del Mar. They stayed in the presidential suite for 4 nights. Tyler squeezed his eyes shut. A part of him had known this was coming, but hearing the cold, hard evidence still felt like a punch to the gut. I have more, Carl said. I have a contact down in Cabo, a photographer who does work for the celebrity magazines. He got pictures. What kind of pictures? Tyler asked, already fearing the answer. The kind of pictures that will make your sister's divorce attorney a very happy man. Tyler stared at the photographs spread out on Carl's desk. In one, Marcus and Victoria were walking hand in hand along a private beach. In another, Victoria was feeding Marcus strawberries at a candlelit dinner. A third showed Marcus kissing Victoria's neck as she laughed, throwing her head back in pure joy. But the worst photo of all was taken at the resort's spa. Marcus's wedding ring was sitting on a little table next to a massage bed, clear as day, and on Victoria's left hand, a massive diamond ring sparkled in the Mexican sun. It was clearly an engagement ring, and it must have cost a fortune. Tyler zoomed in on the photo with his phone. That ring is huge, he said. It must be at least 5 carats. Carl nodded. It is a custom piece. I showed it to a jeweler I know. He estimates it cost well over $200,000. Rachel's engagement ring was beautiful, but it was nothing like this. Marcus had always talked about upgrading her ring one day once the company was on more solid ground. It turned out he did get an upgrade, just not for his wife. When did he propose to Rachel? Carl asked. About 2.5 years ago, Tyler replied. Well, Carl continued, he proposed to Victoria 3 weeks ago. It was during a private dinner in Malibu. I even have the receipt from the restaurant. He bought a $9,000 bottle of champagne to celebrate. Tyler felt sick to his stomach. This was not just a fling, this was an entirely separate life. Marcus was building a whole future with another woman while his pregnant wife was at home, believing every single lie he told her. She has to know the truth, Tyler said, his voice firm. Carl nodded slowly. She does. But the problem is how you deliver this kind of news. The timing is everything. Your sister just had major surgery. Her baby is still in the neonatal intensive care unit. If you tell her this right now, it could completely destroy her. But if I wait, Tyler countered, it just gives Marcus more time to cover his tracks. That is also a risk, Carl admitted, leaning back in his chair. So you have to make a choice. What is more important right now, your desire for justice or the need to protect your sister's health? It felt like a decision with no right answer, and Tyler had no idea what to do. In the end, though, Rachel made the choice for him. When Tyler got to the hospital later that afternoon, Rachel was sitting up in bed. There was something different about her. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes had a clarity he had not seen in a long time. "I need to talk to you," Rachel said. "Please close the door." Tyler did as she asked, his heart starting to race. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Rachel started. "I've been thinking about the night I collapsed. I thought about how Marcus was completely unreachable. And I thought about how he just happened to be on the very first flight from London the moment he heard the news." "Rach, maybe you should just rest," Tyler suggested gently. "I am finished with resting," Rachel said, her voice perfectly calm and strong. "I have been stuck in this bed for 3 days with nothing to do but think, and the details of his story are not adding up." "What do you mean by that?" he asked. Marcus said he was in the middle of some critical business negotiations. He claimed the satellite communications were down and that he came straight to the hospital from the airport. Rachel slowly shook her head. "But Tyler, I know my husband. When he gets off a long international flight, he looks exhausted. His clothes are wrinkled. He has that stale airplane smell on him. But when he walked in here, he looked perfect. He was wearing a fresh suit and his hair was perfectly styled. It was like he had just stepped out of the shower." Rachel's eyes met Tyler's. "He was not in London, was he?" Tyler was silent for a moment. Then, without a word, he took out his phone. He first showed her the screenshot of the location data, and then he showed her the photos. As Rachel looked at each picture, a series of emotions washed over her face. It began with confusion, which quickly turned into disbelief. That was followed by a quiet, hollow shock that was far more painful to watch than tears would have been. "That is not possible," she whispered. Her gaze locked on the photo of Marcus kissing Victoria on the beach. "He told me he was in London. There has to be some mistake." "Rach, flight records do not lie," Tyler said softly. Rachel kept scrolling through the pictures on his phone. When she finally reached the image of Victoria's gigantic engagement ring, her hand automatically moved to her own wedding ring, a beautiful but much more modest 3-carat diamond. 3 years ago, that ring on her finger had felt like the biggest in the world, but seeing it next to Victoria's, it now looked incredibly plain. "He asked her to marry him," Rachel said, her voice hollow and empty. "While I was at home carrying his baby, he proposed to another woman." Tyler added softly, "It happened 3 weeks ago. They were in Malibu." Rachel did not say anything for a very long time. She slowly closed the phone and handed it back to her brother. "I want to see Emma," she said. "Rachel, we have to talk about this. We should be calling a lawyer right now." "I need to see my daughter," she insisted. Tyler helped Rachel settle into a wheelchair. He knew that tone in her voice. It was the same quiet resolve she had when their father walked out on them as children. It was the tone she used when she decided to work her way through college waiting tables. It was the tone she had when she built her entire career from nothing, long before Marcus talked her into giving it all up. The Rachel Morrison she used to be before she became Rachel Bennett had always been a fighter. And Tyler was finally seeing that woman start to reappear. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit, Rachel pressed her hands flat against the glass of Emma's incubator and began to cry. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, hot anger. "He knew," she whispered, "when I called him 2 days before I collapsed. To say I was not feeling well, he already knew. He knew he was taking a trip to Mexico with her. He kissed me goodbye that morning, Tyler. He said he loved me, And the whole time, he was making plans to propose to someone else. Tyler stood by and watched his sister's expression transform right before his eyes. The naive young woman who had placed all her trust in her husband was vanishing. In her place stood someone stronger, someone with a new, sharp focus. "How long do you think this has been happening?" Rachel asked. "Carl is still investigating," Tyler said. "But from what we can see on the flight records, they took at least 6 trips together this past year. It was always during the times Marcus told you he was away on business." Rachel stood quietly for several minutes, her hand still resting on the incubator's warm plastic shell. When she finally turned to speak, her voice was much firmer. "I want to see everything. Every flight, every deception, every single dollar he wasted on her. I want to see receipts, photos, and bank statements. I want all of it." "Rachel, maybe you should just concentrate on getting well first. This can all wait." "No, it cannot," Rachel replied. She turned to look at him, and Tyler saw a steely gaze in her eyes he had never seen before. "Because sooner or later, he is going to come back here. And when he shows up, he is going to have a perfectly reasonable story for everything. He will try to make me feel like I am insane for even questioning him. He is going to twist the situation around until it somehow becomes my fault." Tyler knew she was right. Marcus had a remarkable ability to manipulate people. He was a master at making others doubt their own minds. "But if I have proof," Rachel went on, "if I have solid evidence that he cannot deny or explain, then I will be the one with the power. For the first time in 3 years, I will finally have some control." "What are you planning to do?" Tyler asked. Rachel looked back at her daughter, Emma, who was sleeping so peacefully, completely unaware of the machines that were keeping her alive. "I am going to protect my daughter," she said, "and I am going to make absolutely sure that Marcus Bennett pays for every single lie he has ever told me." 2 weeks later, Rachel was discharged from the hospital. Emma needed to remain in the intensive care unit for a few more weeks, but Rachel was finally well enough to leave. She did not return to the mansion in Greenwich. Instead, she got a room at a hotel close to the hospital. She told everyone that she just wanted to be near Emma. But the real reason was much simpler and far more painful. She just could not bear the thought of being inside that house. The idea of returning to that house was horrifying. It was the place where her entire world had fallen apart, where every single room was haunted by the ghost of a life she now knew was a complete fabrication. Her friend Diane helped her get settled in, showing up with comfort food, a bottle of wine, and the kind of direct friendship Rachel desperately needed. "All right, so what is the strategy?" Diane asked, pouring 2 generous glasses of Pinot Noir. "First thing," Rachel said, "I need an attorney. A very good one. Someone who specializes in divorces that involve a lot of money and is not afraid to take on a billionaire." A wide grin spread across Diane's face. "Girl, I've been waiting 3 years for you to say that. I know the perfect person." Helena Cross was even more impressive than Rachel could have hoped. At 48 years old, she had earned a reputation as the most formidable divorce lawyer in all of Manhattan. She was known for never backing down from powerful men and their expensive legal teams. The walls of her office were covered with framed newspaper articles detailing her victories, each one a story of a wealthy husband who had made the mistake of underestimating her. "Your situation is an absolute nightmare," Helena told Rachel bluntly as they sat in her midtown office. "But it is a nightmare that also holds some promise." "What are you trying to say?" Rachel asked. "The positive side is that the cheating gives us a legal advantage," Helena clarified, "especially because he abandoned you during a medical emergency. The negative side is that you signed a prenuptial agreement that is practically unbreakable in a typical case." A cold feeling washed over Rachel. The prenup was something Marcus had insisted on before their wedding. She had signed it without a second thought, too swept up in love to imagine she would ever have to worry about it. What would make this an atypical case? "If we can prove that you were deceived into the marriage," Helena said, "or if we can demonstrate that Marcus was already misleading you when you signed that document, we might be able to have the entire agreement thrown out. The private investigator has evidence that Marcus's trips with Victoria began 18 months ago, That was even before Emma was conceived. Helena's eyes lit up. That is an excellent start, but we are going to need more. We need financial records that prove he was lying, proof of hidden bank accounts, evidence that Marcus was planning on leaving you while concealing the family's true financial standing. How in the world can we get that kind of proof? Rachel asked. Helena showed a smile that looked a lot like a hunter's. We make him believe he has already won. Then we just wait and watch him get careless. The strategy Helena laid out was risky, but it was also brilliant. Rachel would play the part of the heartbroken wife, grateful for whatever small amount of money Marcus offered her. She would act as if she were only concerned with Emma's health, not with fighting over their financial assets. Meanwhile, Helena's team would launch a secret investigation into the finances of Bennett Technologies. Carl, the investigator, would continue to dig into Victoria's background, and Rachel would gather any evidence she could find from inside their home. The success of this whole plan rests on them believing you are not a threat, Helena said. Wealthy men like Marcus expect women in your position to just accept what they are given. They assume you would rather do that than fight, and possibly end up with nothing. We are going to turn his own arrogance against him. But what if he is right? What if I fight and lose everything? Helena leaned forward. Then you will lose it all with your head held high, and your daughter will grow up knowing her mother was courageous enough to stand up for her. Rachel thought of Emma, so small and fragile in her hospital incubator. She thought about everything she wanted to provide for her daughter. A feeling of safety, a stable home, and a mother who would never allow herself to be pushed around. When do we begin? Helena smiled. We have already started. That evening, Rachel walked back into the enormous house in Greenwich for the first time since she had collapsed. Marcus was there, waiting for her in the living room with a bottle of champagne cooling in a silver bucket. His smile was warm and inviting, the perfect picture of a husband who was overjoyed to have his wife home. I thought we had a reason to celebrate, he said, pouring 2 glasses. Emma is doing so much better, and you are finally out of that hospital. This is very nice of you, Rachel said. She accepted the glass but did not take a drink. She had learned over the years that Marcus only made these grand gestures when he was feeling guilty about something. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our future, Marcus continued, about the kind of life that we want to build for Emma. Rachel managed to arrange her face into an expression of hopeful interest. Oh? I am aware that all of my business travel has been difficult for our marriage, so I've been considering a change in my position at the company. I want to promote Victoria to Chief Operating Officer. Victoria already handles most of the daily operations, and she has a real talent for it. This move would free me up to be here with you and Emma more often. A sick feeling churned in Rachel's stomach. Marcus was actually offering his mistress a huge promotion, disguising it as a loving sacrifice for his family. That sounds like an enormous responsibility for a person so young, Rachel said, choosing her words very carefully. Age does not matter when you have a clear vision, Marcus replied. Victoria understands where technology is going in a way that most people just cannot grasp. I am certain she does, Rachel said. The sarcasm in her voice flew right over his head. Actually, I was hoping you two could finally meet properly. She has been asking about you. She was very worried about your recovery. The nerve of this man was simply astonishing. But Rachel just smiled and nodded, playing her part as the grateful wife. Maybe after I feel a little bit stronger, she suggested. Of course, there is no need to rush things. Just then, his phone buzzed. He looked down, and an expression Rachel knew all too well appeared on his face. It was that eager smile, that private look of pure happiness. I have to take this call. It is a work emergency. He walked out onto the patio. Through the glass, Rachel could overhear pieces of what he was saying. It was not a business call. It was full of soft laughter and whispered sweet words. When he came back inside, his face was a blank slate again. Sorry about the interruption. Crisis managed. Rachel went upstairs to bed early, claiming she was exhausted. But she lay awake for hours, listening to the muffled sound of Marcus's voice as he talked on the phone with Victoria. The fight had officially started, and for the first time, Rachel felt ready. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, Rachel received the call she had been praying for. Helena phoned her at 7 in the morning, her usually composed voice trembling with excitement. "We have him," Helena declared. "Bennett Technologies has been moving money through offshore accounts for the past 2 years. We found shell corporations, hidden funds, and tax strategies that are completely illegal." Rachel's heart began to race. "How much are we talking about?" "A conservative estimate is $50 million. All of that money should have been considered shared marital assets. With this evidence, we can tear your prenuptial agreement to shreds. We can go after half of everything he owns, including those secret accounts. So I can secure Emma's future," Rachel whispered, feeling a wave of relief. "It is about more than that," Helena insisted. "This means you can finally make Marcus face the consequences for what he has done." Rachel felt so light with relief she thought she might pass out. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, she saw a path forward. She could envision a future where she could provide for her daughter, completely free from the man who had betrayed her. "So what happens next?" she asked. "I am filing the documents this afternoon," Helena explained. "It is an emergency motion to freeze every single bank account associated with Bennett Technologies during our investigation. By tomorrow morning, Marcus will not be able to spend $1 without a judge's approval." That evening, Rachel allowed herself a moment of celebration. Diane arrived with a bottle of champagne. Tyler showed up with pizza. Emma was doing so well that she was scheduled to be moved out of intensive care in the next week. Everything was finally coming together. "Here's to karma finally doing its job," Diane said, lifting her glass. "To my sister," Tyler added, "who is about to take that snake for everything he has." Rachel smiled, a true, genuine smile for the first time in months. "To Emma," she said softly, "and to our new beginning." They ate and drank and laughed, and for a few beautiful hours Rachel forgot about the heartbreak and the pain. She looked in on Emma using the hospital's video monitor. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, getting stronger, and gaining more weight each day. Everything was going to be okay. The next morning, Rachel woke up to a phone call that shattered her world all over again. "Mrs. Bennett?" The voice was Jennifer, Marcus's assistant. It sounded unusually cold and formal. "Mr. Bennett needs you to come to the house immediately. There are some documents that require your signature." "What sort of documents?" Rachel asked. "I'm not at liberty to say, but he insisted it is urgent." A chill ran down Rachel's spine, even though the hotel room was warm. Something was terribly wrong. Marcus never asked her to sign anything urgently. He had a whole team of lawyers and accountants for that. "I will be there within the hour," she said. She tried calling Helena on her way to Greenwich, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried Diane. Voicemail? She tried Tyler. Voicemail? By the time she pulled into the driveway of the mansion, Rachel's hands were shaking. Marcus was waiting for her in the formal living room. He was not by himself. A woman Rachel did not recognize sat beside him on the white couch. She was older, impeccably dressed, and had the look of someone who was very familiar with expensive lawyers and making costly threats. Behind them stood a man in a police uniform. "Rachel," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern, "please sit down. We have to talk." "What is happening here? Who are these people?" "This is Margaret Ellis," Marcus explained. "She is a supervisor who has been appointed by the court." "A supervisor for what?" Marcus heaved a great sigh, acting as though he were deeply saddened. "Rachel, I truly hoped it would not come to this, but I have been advised that your recent behavior poses a serious risk to Emma's safety." Rachel felt as if the floor had just dropped out from under her. "My behavior?" "Your paranoid accusations," Marcus said, shaking his head with fake sympathy. "Hiring private investigators. This wild idea that I was having an affair when I was just working overseas. Dr. Patterson told me he is worried you may be suffering from postpartum psychosis. I do not have postpartum psychosis. Denial is often a primary symptom," the woman named Margaret stated coolly, "along with paranoid delusions, obsessive behavior, and an inability to distinguish reality from fantasy." Rachel's blood ran cold. This was not possible. "This is impossible. What are you trying to say?" The officer took a step forward. He did not look pleased about his role in this. "Mrs. Bennett, the court has issued a temporary order. It revokes your access to your daughter until you undergo a full psychiatric evaluation. Revoke my access? She is my baby! And she will be safe in your husband's care while you get the help you need, Margaret said. Marcus stepped closer, holding his arms out as if to comfort her. Sweetheart, I know this is hard to hear, but we all just want what is best for Emma, and that means you need to get better. Rachel jerked back from his touch. Do not come near me, she warned. You see, Margaret said, making a note on her clipboard. Paranoid and avoidant behavior. That is a classic sign. I am not paranoid, Rachel insisted, her voice rising. I have proof that he was cheating on me. What proof? Marcus's voice was calm, almost gentle. Proof that I visited a colleague's apartment to talk about a business deal? Proof that I had dinner with coworkers on a work trip? Rachel, when the mind is unwell, it can make innocent things seem threatening. The pictures, Rachel said, her voice filled with desperation. The flight records, the engagement ring. Marcus held up his hands as if he was totally confused. What pictures? What flight records? Darling, I have been in London for this entire trip. The entire board of directors can confirm my whereabouts. He then pointed to an engagement ring. As for a ring, Marcus said, showing his left hand where his gold wedding band gleamed, I am already married to the most amazing woman in the world. Rachel could only stare at him, her mind racing. The evidence. Helena had all the evidence. Carl had the photographs. I need to speak with my lawyer, Rachel said, her voice trembling. I'm afraid that is not possible right now, the woman named Margaret said, stepping forward. As part of this evaluation, we have to limit contact with any outside individuals who might be reinforcing your delusions. This is insane, Rachel whispered. You cannot do this. The police officer looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I have a court order right here in my hand. I am legally obligated to escort you to the Pinehurst Wellness Center for a 72-hour evaluation. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. Rachel looked from one face to the next. There was Marcus, wearing his mask of loving concern. There was Margaret, looking cold and clinical. And there was the police officer who seemed sorry but resolute. In that instant, she realized she had been perfectly and completely trapped. Let me just grab my purse, Rachel said quietly. Let me say goodbye to my daughter. The nurse's voice was like ice. I am afraid that is not possible. Any contact with your daughter would be unhealthy for you at this time. And in that one awful moment, the entire trap sprung shut around Rachel. Her husband, Marcus, was not just trying to win their divorce. He was trying to erase her. He planned to paint her as an unstable mother, take their daughter, Emma, and cut Rachel out of her life forever. And she had walked right into it. Pinehurst Wellness Center was a beautiful place for ugly secrets. Rich families sent their problems here to vanish. It had gorgeous gardens and private rooms that felt like a 5-star hotel. The staff moved quietly and spoke in soft, soothing voices, but it was a prison disguised as a paradise. For the first 24 hours, Rachel felt like she was in a fog. They took her cell phone. They swapped her designer clothes for a simple gray sweatsuit. They even stripped her of her jewelry, including the wedding ring from Marcus. On the second day, a psychiatrist named Dr. Morris entered her room. He smiled gently and said, Mrs. Bennett, can you tell me why you think you are here? I am here because my husband wants to steal my daughter, Rachel said, her voice steady, and because the lawyer I trusted helped him do it. Dr. Morris jotted a few notes in his pad. Your husband told me you have been experiencing some paranoid ideas. He said you accused him of cheating on you during his business trips. I have proof, Rachel shot back. I have photographs. The doctor's tone was kind, but his eyes were full of doubt. You do? Are those pictures with you now? May I see them? A knot tightened in Rachel's stomach. No, they took my phone from me when I got here. I understand, he said smoothly. And what were these pictures supposed to show? They showed my husband in Mexico with his mistress. He has been seeing her for over a year. Dr. Morris nodded slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. Mrs. Bennett, I had a very long conversation with your husband. He provided me with flight records showing he was in London on those dates. He also gave me statements from his coworkers who were in meetings with him, and he has documentation that the woman you mentioned was actually in Singapore at the very same time. That is impossible, she whispered. Or, the doctor offered softly, is it possible that the strain of your pregnancy and the trauma of your difficult delivery have changed the way you see things? Rachel just stared at him, speechless. He was not being cruel or unkind. He genuinely believed everything he was saying. This meant Marcus had built an entire world of lies using very real-looking forgeries. He had papers, he had witnesses, he had everything he needed to make her truth sound like madness. This was no longer just about a cheating husband. She was now trapped inside a system designed to protect powerful men like him. And she was completely alone. On her third day at Pinehurst, Rachel had a visitor. She was sitting in the day room watching television without really seeing it when a nurse touched her shoulder. "Mrs. Bennet, your mother-in-law is here to see you." The words made no sense. Rachel did not have a mother-in-law. Marcus's mother had died when he was only 12 years old. Her legs felt like lead as she walked to the visiting room, her mind racing, bracing for whatever new nightmare was coming. The woman sitting at the table was a total stranger. She was probably in her 60s, with beautiful silver hair and an air of quiet confidence that spoke of money and power. "Rachel," the woman said, gesturing to the chair across from her, "please sit down. We must speak quickly. We do not have much time," the woman said as Rachel took a seat. "Who are you?" Rachel asked, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Evelyn Grant. I was once Victoria Chase's mother-in-law." Rachel went completely still. "Victoria was my son Robert's wife for 3 years." Evelyn's voice was low and tight, filled with a cold, controlled anger. "She cost him $4 million and nearly destroyed our family's reputation." "I do not understand," Rachel said, confused. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have been reading about your situation in the news," Evelyn replied, "and I recognize all the signs. The wife is suddenly committed to a private hospital. She is not allowed to speak to anyone. The husband gives sad interviews about how much he loves her and wants her to get well." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locked on Rachel's. "It is the exact same playbook she used on my son. Victoria has done this before." A wave of nausea rolled through Rachel. "Victoria Chase is a fake name," Evelyn went on. "Her real name is Amber Jenkins. She is a professional con artist. I know of at least 3 other wealthy men she has targeted. She finds a way into their lives, convinces them to leave their families, and then disappears with every penny she can get." The room felt like it was tilting. "But Marcus is not a victim," Rachel managed to say. "He was cheating on me with her." "Of course he was," Evelyn said. "But he is a fool, and she is playing him too." "Amber does not just go after the husband," Evelyn explained. "She researches the whole family. She looks for men who are already unhappy, men looking for an excuse to burn their old lives down. She becomes that excuse, and she makes sure she gets paid handsomely for it." "Then why are you here? Why are you helping me?" Rachel asked. "Because my son Robert did not see the truth until it was too late. By then, he had already ended his marriage, alienated his children, and given Amber access to accounts that she cleaned out completely." Evelyn's gaze was like stone. "I will not stand by and watch her ruin another family like she ruined mine." She slid a small business card across the table. "This man is a lawyer, a real lawyer. He is not for sale. Call him the second you get out of this place." Evelyn then rose from her chair. "And Rachel," she said, her voice firm, "do not let them convince you that you are crazy. The most dangerous thing about a lie is that, if you hear it enough, you start to believe it." Rachel was released from Pinehurst after the mandatory 72-hour hold. The doctor's final report said that she was suffering from extreme stress, but showed no evidence of being a danger to herself or an unfit mother. Imagine being told you cannot see your own newborn baby. That was the nightmare Rachel was living when she arrived at Greenwich Hospital. A security guard stopped her right at the entrance to the infant intensive care unit. "I am sorry, Mrs. Bennet," the guard said, looking uncomfortable. "Your right to visit has been restricted until a court can look into the matter." "Restricted?" "My daughter is in there," Rachel cried. "I know, ma'am, but we have a court order. You are only permitted supervised visits for 1 hour once a week." Through the glass doors, Rachel could see the nursery. Standing right beside Emma's incubator was Marcus. He was holding their little girl, smiling down at her, playing the part of the perfect, caring father for everyone to see. Rachel slammed her hands against the glass, screaming his name, but it did no good. Security escorted her from the building. Her friend Diane was waiting outside with tears streaming down her face. "Rachel, I am so sorry. I tried to call you. I tried to get into that place, but they refused to let anyone see you." "What about Helena, the proof we had?" "It is all gone," Diane said, her voice shaking. "Helena's law firm says they can't represent you anymore because of a conflict of interest. And Carl, the investigator, told me his office was broken into. Every picture, every single document, it all just vanished. This is completely hopeless." "Marcus has the kind of connections and money we could never fight," Diane said. "He had 3 full days while you were locked away. That was more than enough time to pay off anyone who was on our side and to erase every piece of evidence we had." Rachel collapsed onto a bench outside the hospital, feeling like her legs could no longer support her. She had no lawyer, no evidence, and no money. And the most agonizing part was that she had no way to get to her daughter. It felt like Marcus had already won. "What am I supposed to do now?" Rachel whispered to herself. Diane sat down next to her and took her hand. "You are going to fight back," Diane said with a determined voice. "I'm not sure how just yet, but you are the toughest woman I have ever known. You are not going to let that horrible man take your little girl." But the immediate problem was that Rachel had nowhere to go. All of her bank accounts had been frozen. She was banned from her own home. Every credit card she tried to use was declined. She was married to a billionaire, yet she could not even pay for one night in a hotel. "You are coming home with me," Diane insisted. "My couch is not glamorous, but it is all yours for as long as you need it." That evening, as she lay on Diane's old, worn-out sofa in that tiny apartment in Queens, Rachel just stared at the ceiling. She tried to understand how her entire life had crumbled into pieces. It was a total nightmare. She had $47 in her purse, a daughter she was not allowed to see, and a husband who had successfully painted her as an unstable person to the entire world. She had absolutely nothing else to lose. And as she was about to learn, that made her far more dangerous than Marcus could have ever guessed. For the next 2 weeks, Rachel walked around in a daze of complete sadness. She had to pump breast milk that she knew she could never give to her own baby. She sent out applications for jobs that would never consider hiring her. Her name was now linked to newspaper articles about the ugly divorces of the wealthy. She made call after call to lawyers, but as soon as they heard she was going up against Marcus Bennett, not a single one was willing to take her case. The whole system was built to defeat people just like her, and it was working perfectly. Then, on a gloomy Tuesday morning, her world shifted. Diane was at her job. Rachel was all alone in the small apartment, aimlessly looking at job postings that she knew were a dead end. That is when she heard a knock on the door. She was not expecting company. In fact, she had stopped expecting anything at all. When Rachel looked through the peephole, she saw a woman she recognized instantly. It was Victoria Chase. Rachel's hand started to shake as she reached for the doorknob. Every part of her was screaming not to open that door. This was the woman who had helped ruin her marriage. This was the woman who was most likely living in Rachel's house at that very moment, sleeping in her bed, and acting like a mother to her daughter. But her curiosity was stronger than her fear. Rachel slowly opened the door. In person, Victoria looked nothing like the photos the investigator had shown her. She was much thinner and her skin was pale. She had dark rings under her eyes that even the most expensive makeup could not cover up. She looked like a woman who had not had a good night's sleep in a very long time. "I have to talk to you," Victoria said. "Can I please come inside?" "Why on earth would I ever let you into this home?" Rachel asked. "Because I am the one who can help you get Emma back." Rachel just stared at her for a few long seconds, and then she moved out of the way. Victoria took a seat on Diane's couch, holding a glass of water that she never drank. "My real name is not Victoria, it is Amber Jenkins," she began. "I am what you would call a professional con artist. I have been running this exact same scam for the past 8 years. Rachel's jaw tightened. "So you make a living by destroying families for their money?" "I go after men who are already on a path to destroy their own families. I just speed things up a bit, and I make sure that I get paid for it," Amber said in a flat, empty voice. "I am not trying to defend it. I am just telling you how it is." So why are you here now? Rachel asked. Because Marcus is not like the other men. What are you trying to say? Amber finally lifted her eyes to meet Rachel's. The men I used to target were all weak and full of themselves. They were easy to control. They cheated on their wives to feel important. They left their families because they wanted someone younger. They were pathetic, but they were not a threat. And Marcus? Marcus is a monster. Amber's voice began to tremble. I really thought I was the one controlling him, but he was playing me from the very beginning. Rachel felt a strange change inside her chest. It was not pity, but it was a sense of connection. She understood what it was like to believe you were in charge, only to discover you were just another pawn in someone else's sick game. What did he do to you? He wrapped his hands around my throat last week, Amber said in a low voice. He told me that if I ever even thought about leaving him, he would ruin me, just like he ruined you. And I knew he meant it, because I have seen what he is capable of. Why would he threaten you? I thought the two of you were getting married. Amber let out a bitter laugh. There was never going to be a wedding. Marcus does not want a wife. He wants things he can own, Amber explained. I was a useful tool while he was trying to get you out of the way. Now that you are gone, I am just another problem he needs to solve. Rachel let all of this new information sink in. So, you did not come here because you feel guilty. You came here because you need me to help you. I am here because we have to help each other, Amber replied. She then pulled a small USB drive from her pocket. I have recorded every single conversation that Marcus and I have had for the last 6 months. It was my insurance policy in case everything fell apart. And Rachel, things have fallen apart in a very, very bad way. What is on that little drive? Everything. It has Marcus admitting that he faked your medical records. It has Marcus and his mother planning exactly how to frame you for financial fraud. It has Marcus talking about how he would make sure you never saw Emma again. Amber carefully placed the drive on the coffee table that sat between them. This is enough to bring him down completely, but only if we use it the right way. Rachel listened to the recordings, and her heart was beating so fast she thought it would explode. She heard Marcus's cold, calculating voice talking about her as if she were a business problem, not the woman he once claimed to love. The postpartum psychosis story is brilliant, Marcus said on one of the recordings. Nobody ever questions a mother's state of mind after a difficult birth. All we need is a couple of doctors willing to sign the papers. Then Rachel will just be the crazy ex-wife who nobody would ever trust with her own child. Victoria's voice then asked, So where do I come into this picture? What role am I supposed to play once the divorce is final? You will become Emma's stepmother, of course. We will need to wait a little while so it looks proper. But Victoria, you already know the arrangement. If you do your part, you will receive a very generous payment. And what if Rachel decides to fight back? Marcus simply laughed. With what resources? I've already paid off her lawyer. I am currently working on her private investigator, and as soon as she is locked away for a psychiatric review, not a single person will believe a word that she says. The recordings went on for hours. Rachel and Amber listened to every word together, creating a plan for complete destruction that went far beyond a simple affair. Marcus had been planning to get rid of Rachel even before their daughter Emma was born. The pregnancy just gave him the ideal chance to do it. Later that night, Tyler and Diane arrived at the small apartment to join them. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Tyler said, pacing back and forth across the small living room. The very woman who helped destroy my sister's entire life is now our best hope? She is our only hope, Rachel corrected him. And she provided the evidence that might give us a chance to win this. And how exactly did she get this evidence? Diane asked with her arms folded. She secretly recorded conversations that a judge might not even accept in a courtroom. It does not need to be accepted in a courtroom, Amber explained. It only needs to be seen by the public. Marcus's entire company is built on his reputation as a brilliant young tech innovator, a devoted family man, and a generous community supporter. If these recordings get out, his investors will vanish. His board of directors will walk away. Everything he has built will crumble into nothing. You want to leak this to the press? I want to give Marcus a choice, Rachel said. The very same choice that he gave to me. He can either give up everything or he can stand by and watch his whole world burn to the ground. Diane just shook her head. Rachel, this is extremely risky. You are about to blackmail a billionaire. I am about to fight fire with fire, Rachel answered, her voice completely steady. Marcus used his money and his influence to destroy me. He took my daughter from me and made me appear to be insane. Now I finally have something that he can never purchase: the truth. Tyler stared at his sister's face for a long time before he finally nodded his head. What can we do to help you? I need your assistance to set up a meeting with Marcus. Just the two of us. That is a horrible idea, Diane said, without hesitation. He might call the police on you. He could have you committed again. Rachel nodded. He could do that, but he is not going to. I am going to offer him a proposal that is too good for him to reject. They arranged the meeting for Friday evening at a restaurant in Greenwich. It was a neutral place, public enough to ensure safety, but private enough for a serious conversation. Rachel arrived first. She ordered a glass of water and sat waiting. Marcus showed up exactly at 7 o'clock. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than a new car. His smile was filled with confidence, as though he found the entire situation entertaining. Rachel, he said, smoothly sitting down in the chair across from her, I must say I was surprised that you wanted to see me. My lawyers advised me not to come. I am sure they did. They likely think you are unstable, that this is some sort of trap. Rachel offered a small smile. Well, they are about halfway correct. The certainty in Marcus's eyes flickered for a moment. What is that supposed to mean? It means I have spent the last month studying the way you do things. And Marcus, I have turned into an excellent student. She pulled out her phone and played a 30-second audio recording. Marcus's own voice filled the quiet air between them. The postpartum depression angle is perfect. Nobody ever questions a new mother's mental state after a hard delivery. The color completely left Marcus's face. Where did you get that? Does it make a difference? Rachel asked, her voice calm and almost conversational. The important part is that I have 12 hours of recordings just like that one. It is all on there, you and Victoria, plotting how to destroy my life. You confess to financial crimes. You even discuss how to bribe public officials. That is not legal evidence. It will not stand up in a court of law. Maybe not in a courtroom, Rachel said as she leaned forward. But it would be incredibly interesting to your business partners, your board of directors, and all the journalists who write those glowing articles about the wonderful young chief executive officer with the perfect family life. You are bluffing. Am I? Rachel then pushed a printed email across the table. This is from Sarah Chen at the Wall Street Journal. She is preparing a major story about scandals in the tech industry. I have given her first rights to the story. Marcus simply stared at the sheet of paper, his confident attitude beginning to crumble. What is it that you want? Rachel listed her terms. Full and exclusive custody of our daughter, Emma. The prenuptial agreement is to be thrown out. $50 million, which I know is far less than what you have hidden in secret offshore accounts. And Marcus, this is the most critical part. You will never attempt to see me or our daughter ever again. No visits, no phone calls, and no contact whatsoever. That is absurd. It is the price for keeping your secrets, Rachel said, as she stood up from the table. You have until Monday to consider my offer. If I do not have legally signed documents by noon, the recordings will be sent to the media. She walked out of the restaurant without looking back even once. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could hardly grip her car keys, but she held herself together until she was safely alone in the parking lot. The moment she was inside her car, she called Diane. It is done. Now the only thing we can do is wait. Monday morning began with heavy clouds and a cold rain that perfectly matched Rachel's feelings. She had hardly slept at all since her meeting with Marcus. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the way his confidence had been shattered, and the cold, hard look in his eyes as he weighed his options. She knew she had forced him into a corner, and a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. At 11:45, her phone vibrated. It was a text from a number she did not know. The papers have been signed. They are on their way to your lawyer's office right now. Rachel just stared at the message. She had given Marcus the name of the attorney Evelyn had recommended, a man named David Stone who was known for being impossible to corrupt. Could it really be over? She called David immediately. "Mr. Stone, this is Rachel Bennett. Did you receive any documents from my husband?" "I did," David replied, his voice cautious. "Mrs. Bennett, these papers grant you everything you asked for. Full custody, the prenuptial agreement is nullified, and a settlement of $50 million. Rachel could feel warm tears streaming down her face. So it really worked. He actually gave in. It certainly looks that way. But Mrs. Bennett, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have been practicing law for 30 years. Men like Marcus Bennett do not simply surrender like this. What are you trying to say?" "I am trying to say that you need to be cautious. Read every single word of these documents before you put your name on them, and always be aware of what is happening around you." That evening, Rachel went to Diane's apartment for a small get-together. Diane had a bottle of champagne, Tyler brought a pizza, and even Amber was present, looking anxious but also somewhat optimistic. "To getting your life back," Diane announced, raising her glass. "To Emma," Tyler said. "She is finally getting her mother back for good." Rachel smiled, but she felt a growing sense of worry. It all felt too easy, too straightforward. Marcus Bennett was not a man who ever lost. He would never give up $50 million without putting up a furious fight. So what was she missing? The answer came at 9:17 with a series of loud, forceful knocks at Diane's front door. "New York Police Department, open the door!" Diane's face went pale. "What is happening?" Tyler stood in front of the door as if to block it with his body. "Do you have a warrant?" "We do." "Open this door immediately or we will break it down." They opened the door. 3 police officers entered, followed by a detective who looked like he had seen it all 1,000 times. "Rachel Morrison Bennett," the detective said, flashing his badge. "You are under arrest for wire fraud and extortion." Rachel's entire world began to spin. "What?" "We have evidence that you attempted to blackmail Marcus Bennett with illegally obtained recordings, and that you conspired with Amber Jenkins to embezzle funds from Bennett Technologies. That is not true. I have not stolen a single thing." "The police are going to love hearing that," Rachel said, reaching for her phone. But just then, a loud banging echoed from the apartment door. "Police, open the door!" Rachel and Amber looked at each other in pure panic. 2 officers pushed their way inside, followed by a detective in a long coat. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Marcus Bennett," the detective said calmly. At that moment, Rachel's friend Diane rushed in, followed by a man in an expensive suit. "Rachel, we got the signal. Are you all right?" Diane shouted. The lawyer stepped forward. "My name is Tyler Vance. Miss Jenkins contacted my office 2 days ago. We have the original unedited recordings, her full testimony, and bank records that trace every illegal payment." Rachel turned to Amber, completely speechless. Amber offered a small, shaky smile. "Marcus was watching me. I had to make him believe I was still his pawn. I knew he would try to set you up one last time." A news alert lit up Diane's phone. She turned the screen so Rachel could see. The headline read, "Billionaire Marcus Bennett arrested for fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy." Beneath it was a picture of Marcus in handcuffs, his perfect image destroyed forever. Tears of pure relief streamed down Rachel's cheeks. After so much darkness, she could finally see the light. She was going to get her daughter back. The nightmare was over. "I am so sorry." The holding cell in the Manhattan Detention Center was cold and gray. It smelled like pure hopelessness. Rachel buried her face in her hands, sitting on a hard metal bench. She tried to understand how her world had fallen apart so fast. She had been so close to getting her life back. She had the signed papers that gave her custody of her daughter and her freedom, but now she was facing serious federal charges. She could go to prison for many, many years. Around 2 in the morning, a guard approached her cell. "Bennett, you have a visitor." Rachel followed the guard to the visiting area. She expected to see her lawyer, David Stone, or maybe her friend Diane. But the woman waiting for her was a total stranger. She looked to be in her 60s, with beautiful silver hair. Even under the harsh lights at this late hour, she was dressed with elegance. "Mrs. Bennett," the woman said. "My name is Margaret Bennett. I am Marcus's mother." Rachel froze right where she stood. Marcus had always told her his mother was dead. He tells everyone that, Margaret said calmly. It is much easier than admitting that I want nothing to do with him. Margaret gestured to the chair across the table. Please, sit down. We do not have much time. Why are you here? Rachel asked. I am here, Margaret answered, because my son has become a monster. I will not stand by and watch him destroy another innocent life. Rachel slowly lowered herself into the chair, her thoughts racing. Another woman? Marcus's first wife, Margaret explained. Her name was Elizabeth. She died in a car crash 8 years ago. At least that is what the official report says. And what does the unofficial story say? Rachel asked. Elizabeth was trying to leave him. She had proof of everything, his affairs, his financial crimes, his abuse. She was planning to take their son and simply disappear. A deep and ancient sadness filled Margaret's voice. She died just 2 weeks before their divorce was scheduled to be finalized. It was a single car accident on a wet road. There were no witnesses. You think Marcus had her killed? I believe my son is capable of anything to protect his empire. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes locked on Rachel's. And I believe you are in much greater danger than you realize. I am already in jail, Rachel said. I am facing federal charges. Those charges are about to disappear, Margaret assured her. That is not Marcus's real goal. This arrest is just a way to keep you busy, to have you locked away while he puts his real plan into motion. Which is what? Amber Jenkins was never on his side, Margaret said. She has been working for me. Margaret then slid a large folder across the table. It was thick with papers. I have been collecting evidence against my own son for years, waiting for the right moment to finally stop him. And Rachel, that moment is now. Just 72 hours after her arrest, the federal charges against Rachel were dismissed. The official reason was a lack of credible evidence. The real reason was far more complicated. For 20 years, Margaret Bennett had been building a case against her son. She had financial records, sworn statements from witnesses, and solid proof of bribery, fraud, and things that were much worse. This was evidence that could not be bought or threatened into silence because Margaret had hidden it in places Marcus never even knew existed, and she was finally ready to use all of it. I just do not understand, Rachel said. She was sitting in David Stone's office with Margaret, Tyler, and Diane. Why do all of this now? Why did you decide to help me? Because you were the first person strong enough to fight back and survive, Margaret answered. Elizabeth gave up when things got too hard. The other women he hurt simply took his money and signed papers promising to keep quiet. But you, she said, you never gave up the fight, no matter how much it cost you. She could have just let Marcus ruin me. She could have. But you need to understand something about my son, Margaret said, her voice becoming hard as steel. He requires total victory. He cannot stand the idea of an enemy still standing. If you had just taken his money and gone away quietly, he still would have come after you. He could have simply allowed you to walk away, but you challenged him, you made him feel threatened. Now he is determined to see you utterly destroyed, so we have a new plan. We will destroy him first. The plan Margaret proposed was powerful because of its sheer simplicity. Marcus drew his strength from his public persona, from the image of a brilliant and fair businessman who created a great company through honest work and innovation. The problem was that entire image was a complete sham. Bennett Technologies was really built upon a foundation of stolen inventions and partnerships secured with illegal payments. He crushed his rivals using unlawful schemes. At the center of this web of lies was Marcus, a man who had never followed the rules a day in his life. I possess all the proof, Margaret stated. There are patents he lifted from small-time inventors. There are contracts he secured through coercion. There are financial records that reveal decades of deception. Why have you waited so long to reveal this? Because I was terrified, Margaret confessed, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus wields a power I could never hope to challenge alone. If I had confronted him and failed, he would have annihilated me. After that, no one would have been left to expose him. What caused you to have a change of heart? You did, Margaret answered, her eyes fixed on Rachel. You showed me that it is actually possible to fight back. You demonstrated that the justice system can prevail, but only for those who have the bravery to use it. The public announcement was held on a Tuesday morning, right on the steps of the federal courthouse in Manhattan. Margaret stood at a lectern, flanked by her attorneys, facing a sea of journalists. Behind her, massive screens began to flash the damning proof she had gathered over 2 decades. Rachel watched everything from a small cafe across the street, finally cradling Emma in her embrace once more. The court had officially reversed the custody ruling just 3 days earlier. The judge declared there was undeniable evidence of manipulation in the original proceedings. Rachel had wept uncontrollably for an hour straight when her daughter was finally placed back into her arms. Now she observed as Margaret systematically dismantled her own son's empire, piece by corrupt piece. My son, Marcus Bennett, has spent 20 years building a carefully constructed lie about being a respectable man, Margaret declared, her voice resonating with strength and conviction. Today that lie is over. The documents appeared on the enormous screens. They showed purloined patents, forged agreements, and transaction records of cash payments to city officials. The evidence of his crimes was so irrefutable that not even the most skilled lawyer on earth could make it disappear. Then, in the middle of the live broadcast, Margaret made a stunning revelation. "I am also informing you," she announced to the press, "that I am handing over information to federal agents regarding the death of my former daughter-in-law, Elizabeth Bennett. This information indicates her passing was not the unfortunate mishap we were all told it was." The room erupted into chaos. Camera flashes lit up the scene like lightning, and somewhere in his Greenwich mansion, Marcus Bennett was surely watching his entire life implode. Marcus was taken into custody later that afternoon at the airport, just as he was boarding a private jet bound for a country with no extradition treaty. The footage of him being escorted away in handcuffs played on a loop on every news channel for days. The visionary tech entrepreneur, the loving husband, the generous community benefactor, was now nothing more than a fugitive attempting to escape justice. Rachel witnessed it all from Diane's apartment, with Emma sleeping soundly in her lap. "So how do you feel?" her brother Tyler inquired. Rachel thought about his question. She had expected to feel overjoyed, or triumphant, or even thrilled to see the man who had tried to ruin her life finally face consequences. Instead, all she felt was depleted, weary, and surprisingly hollow. "I just feel like I want it to be done," she confessed. "I want to have a single day where I do not have to give Marcus Bennett a second thought." "Then you should do that," Diane insisted. "Go on, use the money from the settlement, take your wonderful little girl, and go build a beautiful new life." The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Rachel was awarded sole custody of Emma. The prenuptial agreement was invalidated due to the fraud, and she was awarded a settlement of $120 million. It was a staggering sum of money, far more than she could ever imagine spending. But the most precious thing she gained was her own liberation. On a beautiful spring morning, Rachel loaded the final box onto a moving van parked outside Diane's apartment building. She was relocating to Vermont to a farmhouse that had a large yard where Emma could play freely. It was a quiet little town where no one knew or gave a thought to the fact that she was once the wife of a billionaire. "Are you really sure about this?" Tyler asked her. "You could remain here in the city, where you would be near all of us." Rachel offered him a faint smile. "I have to have a fresh start. I need a place where no one knows the name Rachel Bennett, a place where I can simply be Rachel Morrison with my daughter." Diane embraced her in a fierce hug. "You have to promise you will come visit, and phone me, and email me photos of Emma every single day." "I promise," Rachel affirmed. She climbed into her car, made sure Emma was safely buckled in her seat, and drove away from the city that had almost shattered her. As she looked in her rearview mirror, the towering silhouette of Manhattan grew smaller and smaller, until it finally vanished from sight. Ahead of her stretched a road she had never traveled, one that led toward a future she couldn't yet picture. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Rachel experienced a true sense of optimism. A year later, Rachel Morrison stood on the porch of her Vermont farmhouse, observing the sun dip below the mountains. Emma had just turned 2 years old. She was toddling joyfully across the grass on her strong little legs, her hands reaching for fireflies that blinked on and off in the evening air like tiny, shimmering stars. Her laughter carried across the yard, bright and pure, holding no memory of the shadow that had fallen over her earliest days. Rachel had honored her promise to Diane. She phoned her sister weekly, sent new pictures daily, and made the trip back to New York twice a year to ensure Emma knew her aunt and her uncle. But Vermont was her true home. She had taken a part-time position teaching English at the local high school. Her students knew her only as Mrs. Morrison, the teacher who was always willing to listen. She was the one who taught that everybody was entitled to a second chance, the one who appeared to know from experience what it was like when the world seemed to turn against you. Her new townsfolk in the sleepy Vermont community knew nothing of the billionaire, the deception, or the harrowing ordeal for survival. To them, Rachel was simply the warm-hearted single mother of little Emma. Her brother Tyler came to see her every couple of months. He would make the drive from New York with his wife Diane sitting beside him in the passenger seat of his pickup. During one of their stays, Diane was watching Emma run around the yard and remarked, "You know, you could have stayed in the city. You could be living a life of luxury with a staff of nannies and maids and never have to work again." Rachel simply smiled and gently shook her head. "That person was never really me. I just went off track for a little while." She had donated the majority of the settlement funds to various charitable organizations. She had set aside enough for a comfortable existence, enough to guarantee Emma would always be secure. But it was not enough to alter the person she was deep down. She was the Rachel who used coupons, drove a practical vehicle, and valued hard work over material possessions. That Rachel had at last returned, and she was more resilient than before. That evening, long after Tyler and Diane had retired to the guest room, Rachel sat on her porch. She had a glass of wine in one hand and a baby monitor on the table. The night was calm and still. The sky was a brilliant canopy of stars you could never appreciate in the city. Far off, an owl hooted its soft call. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. It was a new email from a name she thought she would never encounter again. Margaret Bennett. The subject simply read, "Some news." Rachel tapped the screen to open it. "I felt you should know that Marcus's trial concluded yesterday. He was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of early release. I gave evidence against my own son. It was the most painful thing I have ever had to do, but it was the correct thing to do. Elizabeth needed justice. You needed justice. And the public deserved to know the truth about the man Marcus had become. I hope that you and Emma are happy. I hope that you have finally found the tranquility you were so cruelly denied for so long. You possess a strength you do not realize, Rachel. Never forget that. With sincere regards, Margaret." Rachel went through the email a second time. Then she erased it. Marcus Bennett was a closed chapter in her life. He had no place in her new story. 6 months after that, on a crisp autumn morning, Rachel was sitting at her kitchen table, grading student essays. A rap at the door echoed through the quiet house. She was not expecting anyone. Peeking through the window, she spotted a delivery van in her driveway. A uniformed man stood on her porch, clutching a small parcel. Rachel opened her door. "How may I help you?" The man replied, "I have a delivery for a Rachel Morrison. I will just need your signature on this line, please." She confirmed the delivery on the screen, and the driver handed over the box. It was so light, it felt like it contained nothing at all. There was no sender's address. When she opened it, she found a single photograph inside. The picture showed a stunning beach, complete with palm trees and water so blue it looked like glass. In the middle of the waves stood Marcus Bennett, holding a small baby boy. She flipped the photo over and saw 4 words in handwriting she knew immediately. "See you soon." Rachel stood motionless in her kitchen, her eyes locked on the image. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Marcus was supposed to be in prison, serving a 25-year sentence with no chance of parole. Yet the man in that picture was unmistakably him. It was the same face, the same entitled stance, and the same chillingly vacant eyes. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she called her lawyer, David Stone. "Mr. Stone, My name is Rachel Morrison. I need you to confirm for me that Marcus Bennett is still behind bars." A deep, unsettling silence hung on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Morrison, I have some terrible news for you. There was an incident during a transfer about 3 weeks ago. Marcus managed to escape." "Escaped?" she breathed. The word barely a sound. How could that happen? "He had help from someone on the inside. Our belief is that he was planning this for several months." "Where is he?" she demanded. "We have no idea. He has left the country. He is in a place that will not extradite him. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is on the case, but honestly, with his kind of money, he could be anywhere on the planet." Rachel felt the floor drop out from under her, that horrible, familiar sensation of her entire world collapsing. But this time was different. This time, she was not by herself. She was no longer powerless. And she was done being afraid. She looked out her window to see Emma laughing and playing in the backyard. Then her gaze returned to the photograph. She knew exactly what he was threatening. She understood the cold message he was sending loud and clear. "See you soon." Marcus expected her to be terrified. He wanted her to go on the run. He wanted her to live every single day of her life, consumed by fear, constantly looking over her shoulder. Rachel reached for her phone once more. "Tyler," she said as soon as her brother picked up. "I need you in Vermont. We've got a problem." "What sort of problem?" he asked, his voice instantly tight with worry. Her own voice was surprisingly calm and even. "The kind of problem that won't just go away. Marcus got out. He sent me a message." She could hear him curse under his breath. "That son of a... I'll be on the road tonight." "Bring Diane with you," she instructed. "And Tyler? You should probably pack for a long stay." She hung up and moved back to the window. Emma was still chasing butterflies, completely unaware of the dark cloud that had just descended upon their quiet life. Rachel watched her daughter for a long while. The woman she used to be would have panicked. The old Rachel would have grabbed Emma and fled into the darkness. She had built an entirely new life, believing she could find a safe place away from the man who would never stop hunting her. But that version of her was gone forever. The woman standing there now had survived his web of lies, his deep betrayal, and being wrongly locked away. She had been forced to watch as he took apart her entire world piece by piece. This new woman understood that running was just a way to delay the final confrontation. Marcus Bennett was looking for a war, and this time, Rachel was finally prepared to give him one. She walked to her closet and retrieved a box that she had not opened in over a year. Inside was the powerful secret that Margaret had entrusted to her. It contained a wealth of files, official documents, and solid evidence of other crimes Marcus had committed. It spelled out in detail all the other lives he had shattered and the dark secrets he had paid to keep hidden. This was more than enough to ensure that even if he stayed out of prison, his entire business empire would crumble into nothing. It was enough to turn every single person he had ever wronged into one of her allies. Rachel set the box down on her kitchen table and began to organize the contents. Her fairy tale had been over for a very long time. It ended on the day she collapsed onto a cold marble floor, surrounded by blood, realizing the man who claimed to love her was a monster. But her real story was only just getting started. And in this chapter, Rachel was going to be the one who wrote the ending. The sun started to sink behind the Vermont mountains, painting the evening sky with stunning streaks of orange and deep red. Inside her cozy farmhouse, Emma was happily at play. Rachel was on the phone, talking with lawyers, reaching out to journalists, and connecting with the other women whose lives Marcus had torn apart over the years. She was assembling an army. She was forming a plan. She was constructing a fortress so powerful that her daughter would be safe inside it forever, because this is what mothers do. They stand and fight, they endure the impossible, and they absolutely never, ever give up. Rachel took a moment to look at her daughter again. She wanted to burn this peaceful image into her memory. She watched the last rays of sunlight get caught in her daughter's dark hair. She listened to the sound of her laughter, which was like the most beautiful song. She saw her small hands reaching out to catch the fireflies that had begun to dance in the twilight. "I will always protect you," Rachel whispered to herself, "whatever it takes." Then, she turned back to her work. The fight for their future had officially begun, and Rachel Morrison was ready for battle. Rachel's journey teaches us a lesson that people with money and power pray you never figure out. You cannot put a price on the truth. You cannot keep it buried forever. And you cannot silence it with expensive lawyers, payoffs, or by trying to make someone look crazy. But her victory was not just for her. This is a story that needs to be heard by any woman who was ever gaslighted into thinking her own gut feelings were wrong. Every single mother who has battled against incredible odds to keep her child safe needs to know that winning is possible. Every person who has been crushed by someone with more money and more connections needs to see that the system can be made to work, but only if you absolutely refuse to surrender. Rachel did more than just save her own life. She created a roadmap for others to find their way out of the darkness. And this is how you can help. If this story moved you, please take a second to hit that like button. That one click sends a message to the world that stories of courage and truth are important. It shows that women who stand up to powerful men deserve to have their voices heard. Please leave a comment for me below. Tell me which moment in this story affected you the most. Was it that terrible scene where Rachel was trapped behind the glass? Was it the painful betrayal by someone she thought she could depend on? Or was it that powerful moment when she finally found her strength and said, "No more"? Your comments help us build a community. They create a safe place for survivors to find each other, and for people in the middle of their own struggles to see they are not alone. Share this video with just one person you know who needs to hear it. You do not have to share it because you believe they are in Rachel's exact circumstances. Share it because having knowledge is our greatest form of protection. The more we all learn about how manipulation and control really work, the more difficult we make it for predators to succeed. And if you are not already a subscriber, please become part of our community right now. Click that subscribe button and be sure to turn on your notifications. Next week, we are going to share another unbelievable story that will have you rethinking everything you thought you knew about trust, betrayal, and the high price of speaking the truth. Always hold on to this. You are stronger than the people who try to tear you down. You are smarter than the people who try to make you feel small. And you possess so much more courage than you realize. Until we meet again, continue to fight for your own truth. A quick final thought. Our team pours an incredible amount of work into researching, writing, and producing every single story we bring to you. Every twist in the plot, every single character, and every emotional high and low was carefully created to entertain, to inform, and to empower you, our audience. We are truly thankful that you choose to spend your valuable time with us. Model.